Hello, babies. Tonight, under the soft glow of the moon and with the stars twinkling gently above, I will tell you a magical tale called The Ancient Telescope. It's a dreamy adventure about a very old telescope hidden deep in a forgotten village that could see not just stars and moons, but also dreams, wishes, and stories from faraway lands. Long ago, this telescope belonged to a kind old stargazer, and one day, a curious little girl named Luma finds it, beginning a journey that will lead her to floating islands, talking owls, and even the edge of the sky itself. Now, snuggle into your blankets, close your eyes if you'd like, and listen gently as the tale begins. Once upon a time, in a village nestled between sleepy hills and quiet rivers, there was a garden so old that even the trees whispered tales of long-forgotten years. In the middle of this garden stood a tiny cottage, its roof covered in moss, and its windows shaped like moons and stars. This cottage belonged to no one, or so the villagers believed. It had been empty for many lifetimes, and the path to it was overgrown with dandelions and soft, tickly grass. But one golden morning, as the dew still clung to every leaf, a little girl named Luma wandered too far from her grandmother's house. Luma was not like other children in the village. She had a heart full of wonder, a pair of eyes that shimmered like moonlight, and a laugh so soft it could lull birds to sleep. She loved to wander quietly, listening to the breeze, talking to pebbles, and imagining the stories behind every fluttering curtain or flickering candlelight she saw. That morning, she followed a butterfly with wings the color of the morning sky. It flitted through fields and forests, weaving through ferns, until at last it danced through the open gate of the forgotten garden. Luma, barefoot and bright-eyed, stepped through the gate and into the hush of the garden. The moment she entered, something shifted in the air. The wind slowed. The leaves leaned closer. Even the butterflies stopped on a petal, as if waiting. She tiptoed through the garden, brushing past tall wildflowers and curling vines, until she stood before the cottage. Its wooden door was carved with tiny stars, and above the door there was a small sign, faded with age. Luma squinted and read the words aloud, slowly. To see the sky is to see the soul. Her fingers gently pushed the door open. It creaked like an old lullaby. Inside, the cottage was full of dust and dreams. Cobwebs hung like soft lace, and books were piled like sleeping puppies on every surface. There were jars of stardust, feathers of birds that only flew at night, and candles that glowed without flame. But what caught Luma's breath was what stood in the center of the room. A tall, ancient telescope, made of brass and silver, and something that shimmered like moonlight itself. It was taller than Luma, with carvings of dragons, clouds, and constellations along its long body. A small stool stood beside it, as if waiting for someone small and curious. The telescope's lens, though dusty, sparkled gently in the sunbeam that slid through the round window above. Luma stepped closer, her heart thumping gently like a rabbit's. She placed her hands on the telescope and felt a warm hum travel through her fingers. It was as if the telescope remembered being held, remembered stories, remembered stargazers who once whispered dreams through it. Suddenly, the room felt less dusty. The shelves of books seemed to sigh with joy. A breeze drifted in through the window, and the telescope turned, just a little, on its own, pointing upward toward the round glass above. Luma climbed onto the stool and looked through the lens. She expected to see the sky. But instead, she saw a ship. Not just any ship, a floating ship, sailing gently through clouds of lavender and blue. On board, a family of cloud whales sang lullabies, their hum so deep and sweet that Luma's eyes fluttered for a moment, heavy with calm. She pulled back with a gasp. Then she looked again. This time, she saw a forest of glowing mushrooms where tiny foxes with wings played hopscotch on glowing stones. Every time she blinked, the scene changed. A mountain with golden trees, a library floating in the stars, a moon shaped like a teacup, and a girl who looked like Luma, smiling back at her from a sky made of paintbrush strokes. The telescope was not ordinary. It didn't just look at the stars, it looked into stories, into dreams, into possibilities. Luma giggled, the sound wrapping around the room like a ribbon. She stayed there for hours, peeking into hundreds of magical places, her heart growing fuller with every vision. But as the sun began to set, the telescope showed her something different. A map. A soft, glowing map with a path that began at the cottage and curved through fields of floating candles, rivers that sang, and trees that whispered secrets. At the end of the path was a door, a glowing, golden door in the middle of the sky. Luma's breath caught in her throat. She felt it, a tug, not from the telescope, but from somewhere inside her, like a gentle pull saying, "Come find me." And just as the last ray of sunlight kissed the cottage roof, Luma whispered softly to the telescope, "I'll go." The telescope shimmered in reply, a quiet hum of approval, and a small drawer popped open at its base. Inside was a tiny silver key shaped like a star. Luma held it close to her chest, and the cottage felt warmer. She didn't know what lay beyond the glowing door in the sky, but she knew, deep in her gentle little heart, that the story was only just beginning. And tomorrow, at first light, she would follow the map, and the sky would open just for her. The night that followed was softer than any before. The stars above the village twinkled like sleepy eyes, and the moon smiled quietly as it watched over little Luma, who slept curled up in her grandmother's bed, the silver star key tucked safely beneath her pillow. She dreamed, of course. Not ordinary dreams with scattered images and fleeting thoughts, but clear, bright dreams full of floating lanterns, gentle animals with golden eyes, and a staircase made of clouds winding up, up, up into a night sky that sang lullabies. When the morning sun peeked over the hills, Luma awoke with a gentle flutter in her chest. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't fear. It was something softer. A feeling like holding a warm cup of cocoa with two hands. A feeling that something wonderful was waiting. She dressed in her softest clothes and packed her little pouch with a biscuit, a bottle of water, and a ribbon her grandmother had given her. The silver key sparkled in her palm before she tucked it safely into the pouch. She whispered goodbye to her sleeping grandmother, who mumbled something sweet and sleepy, then tiptoed down the old path toward the garden. The air was different today. The trees rustled like they were greeting her. The flowers opened wider, and the wind carried a faint tune, like the memory of a lullaby. When she stepped into the garden, the telescope was already awake. It shimmered gently in the sunlight, and beside it on the wooden floor was the glowing map she had seen in the lens the day before. Luma picked it up carefully. The paper was smooth and warm, and the lines glowed with golden light, shifting and moving softly as if alive. The first step on the map led to the garden's edge, where an old well stood, hidden behind a curtain of ivy. Luma had never noticed it before. She stepped through the leaves and found the stone well, its bricks covered in moss. Dangling from a hook was a wooden bucket tied with silken rope. The moment she touched the rope, the map in her hand shimmered and showed a new path, down into the well. Luma leaned over the edge. There was no bottom, only stars, soft, glowing stars that sparkled in the darkness like they were waiting. She blinked. The stars blinked back. And then, without a flutter of hesitation, she stepped into the bucket, holding the map in one hand and the key in the other. The rope began to lower itself gently, like a cradle rocking slowly, deeper and deeper into the well. But instead of feeling cold or damp, the air around her grew warmer and softer, filled with a gentle humming, like the purring of an invisible cat. Down she went, deeper and deeper, until the world above was just a memory and the stars below became her new sky. After a while, the bucket came to a stop. Luma stepped out and found herself standing in the middle of a glimmering field, where the grass was made of silver threads and glowed with a light from beneath the earth. Fireflies the size of buttons floated lazily around, and tiny chimes rang softly whenever she moved. Ahead, the path shimmered, and on it stood a creature. A small owl, no bigger than a loaf of bread, wearing a blue velvet scarf and round spectacles. He looked at Luma with wide, knowing eyes and gave a polite bow. "Ah, Miss Luma," he said in a voice like the rustling of paper, "right on time." Luma blinked. "You know me?" "Oh, yes," said the owl, adjusting his spectacles. "The telescope told me you'd be coming. I'm Orlo, keeper of the silver field. This way, please." He flapped his wings and floated gently ahead, guiding her down the glowing path. As they walked, Orlo told her quiet things. He told her how the field she stood in was called the Dreaming Grassland, a place where old dreams came to rest, and the ground glowed with their leftover warmth. He told her that most children never found their way here, only those with soft hearts and curious eyes. Luma listened with wide eyes, every word a lullaby to her soul. Soon, they reached a hill. At the top stood 3 tall stones shaped like arches. Each arch held a pool of still water, and in each pool shimmered a different scene. The first showed a forest of giant lilies, where bees wore boots and read books beneath the petals. The second showed a sky made of glowing ribbons, with floating umbrellas and birds that painted clouds. The third showed a wide ocean, calm and deep, with floating lanterns shaped like turtles. Orlo turned to her and said gently, "Each arch leads to a place your heart must visit. The order doesn't matter. The key will work in all, but once you begin, the path must be finished. You cannot return until the story is ready." Luma held her breath. She looked at each pool. Each one shimmered, calling softly, like a lullaby just for her. She felt the tiniest tug toward the first one, the lily forest. So she stepped through. The moment her foot touched the water, it rippled like silk, and the world around her shifted. She felt like a feather floating in a breeze. When her feet touched the ground again, she was standing at the edge of a vast forest. The trees here were not trees at all, but giant lilies, their petals as big as rooftops, swaying gently in the golden light. The air smelled sweet, like honey and warm rain. Tiny creatures buzzed and flitted about. And then she saw them, the bees. They wore tiny boots made of leaf leather and each carried little books under their arms. Some wore glasses, some carried ink pots, and all of them nodded politely at Luma as they passed. "Good day," hummed one. "Lovely weather for a story," said another. One especially plump bee landed near her and offered a small biscuit shaped like a star. "You'll need energy," he said kindly. "The path through the lily forest is quiet, but full of whispers." Luma smiled and accepted it, munching slowly as she walked deeper into the forest. The lilies bent slightly as she passed, their petals glowing softly with each step. Somewhere far away, a bird began to sing, a slow, sweet song with no words, just a tune that wrapped around Luma like a blanket. She followed the golden path winding through the lilies, the silver grass tickling her feet, the wind carrying soft secrets. Occasionally, a petal would drift down from above, and when she caught it, it would hum softly in her palm. Each petal held a memory. A child's dream of flying, a sleepy wish whispered under a blanket, a hope tied to a falling star. Luma placed the petals gently into her pouch, each one warm and light. At the heart of the forest, there stood a tree, not a lily, but a tree of glass and light. Its trunk shimmered like crystal, and from its branches hung hundreds of keys, each one different, each one glowing with a color Luma had never seen before. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out, and then the tree spoke, not in words, but in music. A soft tune, played on invisible chimes that wrapped around her heart and led her to a single key resting on a low branch. It looked like her silver key, but smaller, and pulsing gently with a quiet light. She knew it was meant for her. As her fingers closed around it, the lilies around her swayed in unison, and the wind sang her name. Luma. 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 She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the key fill her chest. And far above, through the canopy of lilies and light, the stars whispered that the next part of the journey was waiting. The golden light of the lily forest began to dim ever so gently as Luma held the tiny glowing key in her hand. It hummed softly, like it had a song to share but was waiting for just the right moment. Around her, the giant lilies bowed their great heads, and the bees with their booted feet buzzed in slow, quiet circles above her. Everything felt like it was holding its breath. And then the path lit up again, this time in soft shades of pink and blue, like the colors of early dawn. Luma looked at her map. A new trail appeared, winding through the forest and toward the second archway. Her feet moved on their own, light and sure, as if the ground remembered her from long ago. She passed beneath the giant petals, soft as clouds, as they slowly waved farewell. The bees waved tiny books. A soft breeze lifted her curls, and with the glowing petal memories tucked safely in her pouch, Luma stepped once more into the pool of water beneath the second arch. This time, there was no falling or floating. Instead, it felt like being rocked in a cradle, gently swaying, warm and safe. When she opened her eyes again, she stood on a floating ribbon. Not a bridge, not a path. A ribbon, wide and shimmery, stretching far into the sky, looped and twirled like a dancer's trail through the clouds. Beneath her, the sky shimmered. Above her, more ribbons twisted and curled through the air, like a great ballet of colors. Tiny umbrellas floated by, some upright, some spinning slowly like lazy tops. Birds with paintbrush feathers swooped past, leaving soft trails of cloud behind them, and giggled as they painted new puffs into the sky. Luma gasped with wonder. The ribbon beneath her feet shimmered with every step she took. It sang little notes of music, soft tinkles like bells hidden in cotton. She walked slowly at first, then with more confidence, balancing herself with her arms wide open. A soft flutter beside her caught her attention. A little creature hovered in the air, a bird, no larger than a teacup, with a tail like a paintbrush and eyes like dewdrops. Its feathers shimmered in pastel hues, and it wore a tiny artist's smock. "You're the girl with the key," the bird chirped softly. Luma nodded. "Good," said the bird. "We've been waiting. The sky needs its story." The bird dipped its tail into a pouch of color tied around its waist and flicked it at the ribbon ahead. With a sparkle, a doorway appeared, an archway made of cloud puffs and gentle wind. It fluttered slightly, like it was breathing. "Through here," said the bird, "you'll find the canvas room. But only walk when the sky is listening." Luma tilted her head. "How do I know when the sky is listening?" The bird chirped and circled above her. "The sky listens when your heart is quiet, when your thoughts are soft, when your steps are gentle." So Luma closed her eyes. She placed her hand over her chest. She thought of the telescope, of the lily forest, of the bees and the petal whispers. She listened to her own breath, in, out, in, and then she stepped forward. The ribbon beneath her feet hummed gently, and the door of clouds opened wide. She entered a room made entirely of mist. It was vast and endless, with walls that moved like soft waves and a floor that floated beneath her like fog. In the center, hanging in midair, was a giant canvas, blank and glowing with a soft light. Brushes floated nearby, and pots of shimmering color bobbed like sleepy bubbles. The bird fluttered to her shoulder and whispered, "This is the place where dreams are painted before they're born." Luma stepped forward. One of the brushes drifted down into her hand. It was light and warm, and the bristles tickled her palm. Without knowing how she knew, she dipped it into a pot of gold and began to paint. Her hand moved slowly, first a hill, then a tree, then a sky full of stars, and then her grandmother's cottage, the garden, the telescope, and finally, herself, standing at the edge of a great ribbon path, holding a glowing map and a key that sang when she touched it. The canvas shimmered with every stroke. The room around her whispered with each color. And the bird at her shoulder began to hum a tune so soft it made her eyes grow heavy with warmth. When she finished, the painting glowed gently, and then it moved. The hills swayed with wind, the trees' leaves danced, the stars blinked sleepily, and Luma smiled at her from the canvas. The real Luma, the one with paint still on her fingertips, reached out and touched the canvas. The soft world of mist around her brightened, and the painting began to fold in on itself, gently, carefully, until it became a glowing ribbon, twisting like a note of music. It floated into her hand, light as a dream, and curled into the shape of a heart. The bird whispered, "Keep it close. It will remind you who you are when the sky forgets." Luma tucked the heart-shaped ribbon into her pouch with the petal memories and the key. Then the mist around her began to part. Ahead, the ribbon path glowed once more, curling upward toward the third and final arch. Luma turned to thank the bird, but it had already disappeared, leaving behind a trail of soft pastel feathers. The sky around her shifted into twilight. The ribbon path ahead pulsed gently beneath her feet. And the next part of the journey waited, deeper still, softer still, toward the heart of the story. The twilight sky deepened into a velvety blue, speckled with tiny stars that blinked like drowsy fireflies. Luma stood at the edge of the third and final arch, her pouch now a little fuller, a little heavier, with a silver star-shaped key, glowing petal memories, and a ribbon curled like a heart that shimmered when she breathed. This archway was quiet. It didn't shimmer or sing. It simply waited, as still as the hush before sleep. Luma stepped through. For a moment, everything was silent. And then there was water. Not cold, not wet, but warm and soft, like silk against her skin. She floated, not swimming, not sinking, just drifting gently in a glowing ocean that stretched beyond the horizon. Beneath her, lanterns shaped like turtles glowed softly, their shells pulsing with sleepy light as they glided beneath the waves. Luma looked around. There were no shores, no trees, no sky above, only endless ocean, glowing softly in blue and violet hues. But it wasn't lonely. It felt full, like the water held stories and secrets in its gentle waves. A quiet voice rippled through the sea. "Little dreamer." Luma turned. From the water, a turtle emerged, not large but not small either. Its eyes were old and kind, its shell etched with glowing patterns like constellations. On its back was a tiny garden, where moonflowers bloomed and tiny bells chimed with the ocean's rhythm. The turtle blinked slowly. "You've come far." Luma nodded softly, floating closer. "Is this the end?" The turtle chuckled, the sound deep and slow. "Not the end, child, just the place before the last door." It turned gently in the water. "Come, the ocean has something to show you." Luma climbed onto the turtle's back. The garden on its shell was soft and fragrant, and as they drifted across the sea, she saw that other turtles were swimming far below, each with their own glowing lanterns, each with tiny gardens or quiet passengers reading dream scrolls beneath little leaf umbrellas. The sea began to hum. It wasn't a song, exactly. It was more like a memory. Images formed in the water, ripples shaped like scenes from Luma's life. Her first time seeing the stars, her grandmother braiding her hair by candlelight. A rainy afternoon when she built a fort out of pillows and pretended it was a spaceship. A soft giggle escaped her lips. Then came quieter memories. A time she felt left out during a game. The moment she broke her favorite mug and tried not to cry. A night she whispered to the moon, wondering if it ever felt lonely. The ocean held them all. Not to judge, not to change, just to remember. The turtle said gently, "Every dreamer carries light and shadow. Both are needed to see the stars." They drifted in silence for a while, surrounded by glowing jellyfish and fish that sang lullabies as they passed. Luma watched a seahorse painting words into bubbles, and a school of sleepy fish arranged themselves into shapes like hearts, keys, and clouds. Then, in the distance, she saw it. A door, floating in the middle of the sea. It was tall and golden, just like the one the telescope had shown her. But now it was real. It shimmered softly as if lit from within. The turtle slowed. "This is as far as I go," it said kindly. "You must swim the last bit alone." Luma placed a hand on its shell and whispered, "Thank you." She slipped into the warm water, her pouch tucked safely against her chest. The ocean parted gently for her, guiding her toward the door with waves as soft as lullabies. With each stroke, the water seemed to whisper memories back to her, moments she had forgotten, tiny kindnesses, little joys, quiet wishes. She felt them all return, like a blanket wrapping around her soul. When she reached the golden door, she floated before it for a moment. The key pulsed in her pouch. She reached in, pulled it out, and pressed it into the lock. The door clicked. It didn't swing open. It simply dissolved, melting into stardust, revealing a spiral staircase made of light. Without a word, Luma began to climb. The staircase rose not into the sky, but into something deeper, a space that felt like a dream still forming. Around her were whispers, soft and sweet, the sound of pages turning, lullabies being hummed, the quiet joy of a candle being lit. With each step, her pouch grew lighter. The petals glowed and vanished, becoming stars overhead. The heart-shaped ribbon uncurled and floated away, spinning slowly until it became a gentle breeze that carried her upward. All that remained was the key. And her. When she reached the top of the staircase, there was no room, no throne, no treasure. Only a mirror. Not a mirror of glass, but of sky. When she stepped toward it, the mirror shimmered and showed her the telescope. It sat quietly in the cottage, waiting. But beside it stood a girl with stars in her eyes, moonlight in her hair, and wonder in her smile. It was Luma, but older. Not by years, but by stories, by steps taken, by oceans crossed. And then the mirror dissolved too. And Luma stood once more in the cottage, the real one. Sunlight spilled through the round window. The telescope shimmered softly in the morning light. She blinked. Was it all a dream? But her hand still held the silver key. Only now it no longer hummed. It was quiet, content, complete. The room smelled faintly of lilies and ocean air. A soft feather, pastel pink, lay on the floor near her feet. And on the wall, where there had been only dust and cobwebs before, now hung a ribbon, shaped like a heart, pulsing gently with light. Luma stepped forward, placed the key on the table beside the telescope, and smiled. She didn't need to see through the lens today, because now the stories weren't out there. They were in her. And in the hush of the quiet morning, The garden outside swayed with the breeze, and the telescope stood tall, watching not just the stars above, but the dreamer who had become the story. Luma's days after returning from the journey through the arches took on a quiet, golden rhythm. The cottage, once still and silent, now hummed with soft life. Birds sang longer outside its windows, as if telling stories of what had happened. The flowers in the forgotten garden bloomed brighter, reaching toward her as she passed by, their petals brushing her fingertips like old friends. Each morning, she would rise with the sun and sit beside the ancient telescope, her fingers gently tracing the symbols carved into its brass. Though it no longer showed her drifting sky ships or glowing forests, it pulsed warmly when she touched it, like it remembered the dreams it had shared with her. But something inside Luma whispered that her journey was not yet finished. One evening, as the sky melted into hues of lavender and peach, Luma noticed something different. A small drawer on the telescope, one she hadn't seen before, was slightly ajar. She leaned in, heart fluttering softly, and opened it fully. Inside was a single item, a folded piece of parchment, thick and soft like it had been written long ago, and yet it gleamed with fresh golden ink. Luma unfolded it carefully. The parchment held only a single sentence written in curling script. "When the stars speak, follow their song." She read the words again and again. That night, Luma didn't sleep. She stayed by the telescope, watching the stars above. Hours passed. The sky turned deeper. Then, just after midnight, the telescope turned on its own, its long brass neck slowly rising, then twisting, pointing toward a corner of the sky Luma had never noticed before. She placed her eye to the lens. And this time, she didn't see places. She saw lights, flickering, flashing, in patterns, tiny sparkles moving in rhythm, blinking in a sequence too perfect to be random. And then she heard it, not from the telescope, but from the stars themselves. A soft, slow tune. It was not music with instruments. It was the sound of twinkling. A song made of light and space and gentle silence. Luma stood, holding her breath. She understood. The stars were singing. They were calling. The message on the parchment floated back into her mind. When the stars speak, follow their song. So she followed. She packed her pouch once more, though this time there were no glowing maps or heart-shaped ribbons. She carried only what she needed. Her grandmother's ribbon, the key now still and silver, and a tiny bottle of starlight water she had found resting on the windowsill that morning. Before leaving, she placed a note beside the telescope. "I'm listening." The stars above twinkled brighter. Outside, the garden gate opened without a sound. The path through the village was quiet, everyone tucked into their homes. Even the wind whispered softly, as if it too knew where she was going. At the edge of the village, where the hills rose like sleepy giants, a trail of glowing mushrooms had appeared, tiny dots of blue and white lighting a winding path up into the hills. Luma followed them, step by step, each one lighting up as she approached and dimming behind her. The hilltop greeted her with a field of soft grass and a sky so clear the stars felt close enough to touch. She lay down and looked up. The song of the stars grew clearer. And suddenly, something shifted. A circle of starlight appeared around her in the grass, glowing like moon milk. Then, soft footsteps, not behind her, not beside her, but above her. She sat up slowly. Walking down a staircase made of nothing but light and night air came a figure. It wasn't quite a person, not quite a creature. It shimmered like memory, shaped like a woman with long hair made of silver thread and eyes filled with galaxies. Her voice was softer than the wind. "You heard our song." Luma nodded. The figure knelt and smiled. "We have watched you, through the telescope, through the petals you carried, through the ribbon that sang. You are the dreamkeeper now." Luma tilted her head. "What does that mean?" The figure extended a hand. A small object appeared in her palm, a tiny telescope, no larger than a thimble, carved with stars. "It means," the figure said, "you no longer need to look through us to see dreams. Now you will help them grow." She placed the tiny telescope into Luma's hand, and when Luma held it, the stars above shifted, drawing new lines, new constellations, new shapes. The song changed. It was not calling anymore. It was welcoming. Around her, the stars began to fall, not crashing, not burning, but floating gently down like glowing feathers. Each one touched the earth and became something new. A blossom, a firefly, a flickering lantern. Luma laughed softly, the sound full of wonder and sleep and sky. You have listened, said the figure. You have walked with gentle feet and quiet eyes. Now your story joins the sky. Then the figure faded, melting into the starlight, and the hill was silent again. Except Luma was not alone. The earth around her pulsed with dreams, tiny ones just beginning to sprout. A mouse in the grass whispered its wish. A blade of grass bent under the weight of a beetle who dreamed of flying. And Luma understood. She didn't need to journey to faraway worlds anymore. The world was full of dreams right here. Her job was to care for them, to watch, to listen, to whisper, "Yes, you can." She curled up on the soft grass, the tiny telescope clutched in her hand. The stars above blinked slowly, one by one, as if tucking themselves in, and the dreamkeeper closed her eyes with a heart full of songs, a sky full of stories, and the hush of night wrapping gently around her like the softest lullaby. When Luma awoke, the sky was still brushed with sleepy hues of early morning, soft pinks, pale golds, and misty blues that felt like the final echoes of a dream. The tiny telescope still rested in her hand, warm and pulsing gently, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. She sat up slowly, her hair gently tangled by the night breeze, and looked around. The field on the hilltop was blooming. Where once there had only been grass, there now stood tiny dream flowers, delicate blossoms with petals that shimmered like spun glass. Each flower pulsed softly with color, some pink, some blue, others a silver so soft it almost disappeared into the light. And Luma knew, deep inside, that each flower held a dream waiting to grow. She reached out and touched one. The moment her fingers brushed the petal, she saw it. A vision. A little boy in a distant village, building a treehouse from blankets and sticks, dreaming it would fly. She smiled, her heart glowing. These were the dreams the stars had sung to her about. This was what it meant to be a dreamkeeper. She wandered slowly through the field, each step revealing more blossoms, each blossom revealing more quiet dreams, some small and giggly, others brave and shining, and some that trembled gently, uncertain, like whispers waiting to be heard. With the tiny telescope tucked safely into the ribbon on her belt, Luma sat cross-legged among the blooms and began her new work. She did not pluck the flowers. She did not change the dreams. She simply listened. The dreams bloomed brighter when they were listened to. Hours passed like minutes. The sun climbed higher, but the hilltop remained wrapped in a hush, like a song that never needed to end. Then, as the breeze carried the scent of wild honey and cloudberries, Luma heard the sound of footsteps. Not loud, not hurried, but soft and curious. She turned. A child stood at the edge of the hill. A boy with messy hair, a satchel slung over his shoulder, and eyes filled with wonder. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at the blossoms. "Are they real?" he finally asked. Luma smiled. "They're as real as the dreams they hold." He stepped closer, his gaze wide. One blossom shimmered as he neared, and when he bent to touch it, his face lit up. "I saw myself painting the sky." "You will," Luma said gently, "if you want to." He looked at her, curious. "Are you a witch?" Luma giggled softly. "No, I'm a dreamkeeper." "What's that?" She thought for a moment. "It means I take care of the little hopes and wishes that people carry inside them. I make sure they feel seen and safe, and maybe, just maybe, they'll grow." The boy sat beside her. For a while, they watched the flowers together in silence. Then he pointed to one that shimmered like a raindrop. "That one looks scared," Luma nodded. "Some dreams are. They're new or unsure. They need quiet and kindness." The boy reached out and touched the blossom gently, like it might fly away. "Can I help take care of them too?" Luma smiled again. "Yes, if your heart is gentle and your eyes stay wide." He grinned. From that day on, more children began to find the hill. They didn't come all at once. They came softly like petals on the wind. Each one arrived with a quiet question. Each one left with a glimmer of something glowing. They didn't all become dreamkeepers. Some came to share their dreams. Some came to hear the song of the stars. Some simply came to rest under the soft watch of the blossoms and the steady gaze of Luma, who listened with all her heart. The tiny telescope sat nearby, always ready, always glowing. Sometimes Luma would look through it, not to see new worlds, but to understand the ones already blooming around her. Through its lens, she could see dreams wrapped in laughter, others in longing, and many still unfolding. On one special evening, when the sky turned the color of candlelight and the clouds drifted like drowsy whales, Luma heard a soft knock on the breeze. She turned and saw her grandmother. Older than before, her hair like snowy feathers, her eyes as warm as ever. "I wondered where you'd wandered," her grandmother said with a chuckle. "I found the sky," Luma whispered. Her grandmother sat beside her, brushing a gentle hand over a blossom. It shimmered and sang. "Your grandfather once dreamed of painting with the moon," she said. "Maybe one of these dreams is his." They sat together in the hush, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a blanket, full, loving, and peaceful. Night fell slowly. The stars came out, blinking gently, and then, for the first time in many nights, the telescope began to hum once more. Luma leaned close, placed her eye against the lens. She saw not just stars, not just places, but faces. Children, elders, animals, trees, all dreaming, all hoping, all whispering their wishes into the sky. And in that moment, Luma understood something more. The telescope had never been just a tool to see faraway lands. It had always been a way to listen, to the stars, to the dreams, to the small, steady songs that lived in every heart. She turned to the children nestled in the blossoms, some fast asleep, others drawing with light in the air, their eyes soft with wonder. And with a voice no louder than a sigh, Luma whispered, "Rest well, little dreamers. The stars are listening." As the moon climbed high above the hill, casting silver light over every leaf and blossom, Luma sat in stillness among the dream flowers. Around her, the children had fallen into soft slumbers, curled gently beneath blankets of grass and starlight. Their breaths rose and fell like tiny waves, and the air was filled with a hush so pure it felt like the world itself was sleeping. She looked out at the sky. The stars twinkled more slowly now, blinking like eyes that had watched for thousands of years and never stopped hoping. And in the very center of the sky, a star she had never seen before pulsed softly, like it was watching her. She reached for the telescope. As she looked through its tiny lens, she didn't see lands or forests or glowing oceans. She saw a memory. But it wasn't hers. It was a memory of the telescope itself. Long ago, in a time so distant it had no name, the telescope had been built by a boy in a tower. He had a crooked smile and bright eyes, and he lived all alone among books and candlelight. He had no parents, no visitors, only the stars above, which he watched every night. He had built the telescope with his own hands, carving its wooden frame, polishing the brass pieces, whispering to it as he worked. He gave it a name, Celestine, and when it was finished, he pointed it at the sky and waited, and waited, and waited. Until one night, the stars blinked back. They didn't speak in words, but in light and warmth and the quiet comfort of being seen. The boy grew older, but every night he returned to the telescope. He wrote down what he saw. He named the constellations. He sent his hopes into the sky. But then one day, he vanished. No one knew where he went. The tower was forgotten. The telescope was left behind. Until, many years later, it found its way to the little cottage in the garden and waited again. For Luma. She pulled back from the telescope, her heart full of something too large for words. She ran her fingers over its brass frame. "You were lonely too," she whispered. The telescope gave a soft hum. That night she stayed beside it, not as a stargazer or a dreamkeeper, but as a friend. The wind turned cooler, the stars blinked gently, and something began to shift. From the center of the field, where the blossoms had grown thickest, a new sprout appeared. Luma noticed it at once. It glowed a deeper gold than the others, and its petals opened slowly, like a yawn. Inside, nestled within the flower's heart, was a small stone, smooth and round, etched with a single star. She picked it up carefully. It was warm, and as she held it, she heard a voice, not outside, but inside, a soft, curious voice. "May I dream?" Luma blinked. "Who are you?" "I don't know," said the voice. "I am new, but I feel awake." She looked down at the stone. It pulsed once. This wasn't a dream of a person or a creature. It was the dream of the telescope, a dream it had carried silently for lifetimes, a wish to become something more. Luma placed the stone against her heart. "You may dream," she whispered, and the field shimmered, not with light, not with sound, but with possibility. That night, all the dream flowers bloomed at once. They opened their glowing petals to the sky, and from each one rose a spark, tiny and bright. They floated upward, slow and sure, until they became part of the sky itself. One by one, new stars were born, each one a dream, each one a story. Luma looked up, tears resting gently in the corners of her eyes. The telescope beside her hummed quietly, The children slept on, and the boy from the memory, long gone, yet somehow still watching, was now a constellation above, his crooked smile drawn in stars. She smiled back. The little stone in her hand glowed once more, and she tucked it into the center of the telescope, right where the light gathered most. "Your dream is safe with me," she said softly. From that moment on, the telescope no longer needed to show her other worlds. It had become part of one. Its dream had taken root, and Luma, the dream keeper, watched over it all, not as a visitor, but as a guardian. As the night deepened, a soft melody drifted across the hill, so faint it might have been a memory or a lullaby, or the wind brushing through the stars. And beneath the sky full of blooming dreams, Luma finally lay down, her eyes closed, and the stars, now brighter than ever, blinked above her, watching, waiting, whispering new stories into the night. The morning light arrived gently, like it tiptoed on the breeze. The sky wore a sleepy gold, and the dew-kissed blossoms in the dream field opened slowly, as if reluctant to leave the comfort of the night. Luma stirred beneath a quilt of grass and petals, her hair scattered like a crown around her head. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the telescope, still and golden in the sunlight, a quiet guardian at her side. The little stone tucked within its heart pulsed gently, as if it were dreaming even while awake. Luma sat up, brushing soft leaves from her dress. Around her, the children began to wake, yawning and stretching with smiles that spoke of sweet dreams. Some still held glowing petals in their hands, little tokens of the stories they'd visited while sleeping. "Did the stars whisper to you?" she asked them. One little girl nodded, rubbing her eyes. "I dreamt I was a dragon, but not the scary kind. I lit lanterns with my breath." A boy with hair full of moss grinned. "I was riding a fish made of light. It swam through the sky." The children's voices floated upward like morning birdsong, and Luma listened, smiling softly. The dreams were growing stronger now, not just gentle wishes, but glowing, blooming hopes. She walked to the telescope and placed her hands on its frame. The little starstone pulsed under her touch, and she heard a whisper deep within her mind. "It's time to open the gate." She didn't know what gate it meant, but the telescope did. It turned slowly, its body humming with purpose, and pointed not to the sky, but to the far edge of the hill. There, hidden behind a cluster of ancient trees and flowering vines, stood something no one had noticed before, a tall archway, overgrown with moss and ivy. Luma stepped toward it, her bare feet brushing against blossoms that sparkled as she passed. The children followed her, quiet now, sensing the air had changed. When they reached the archway, Luma gently pushed aside the vines. A soft breeze drifted through the opening. Beyond the arch was not a path, not a forest, not a field. It was a space filled with light, golden, silvery, soft like the glow before sleep. Floating in that space were thousands, no millions, of tiny dream seeds. They drifted slowly like snowflakes, glowing softly in all colors of the heart. Each one pulsed with the warmth of a wish, the hush of a lullaby, the whisper of hope. A gentle voice filled the air, not from any one place but everywhere at once. "This is the grove of beginnings." The children gasped softly, stepping just past the archway, eyes wide with wonder. The voice continued, tender and old as stardust. "Here, dreams are born, but only the gentlest hearts may carry them into the world." Luma reached out and caught one of the dream seeds in her hand. It fluttered against her palm like a tiny heartbeat. She saw a vision, a lonely child wishing for a friend. A painting half finished, a melody hummed under blankets in the dark. The dream seed glowed brighter in her hand. A hush fell over the grove. Then, the dream seed rose from her palm and floated toward the sky, vanishing with a tiny sparkle. And from the telescope, a beam of light reached upward, quiet, steady, full of warmth. The sky shimmered in reply. The archway behind them began to bloom, flowers of silver and soft blue unfurling along its frame, shaped like stars, moons, and keys. Luma turned to the children. "You can help," she said gently. "You can carry dreams, not to keep them, but to protect them, nurture them, and share them." One by one, the children stepped forward. Each caught a dream seed. Each closed their hands gently around it. Each saw something beautiful, something fragile, something waiting to be believed in. And each one smiled. They didn't need to speak. The grove understood. The archway glowed softly behind them, a gate not to another place, but to a promise that every kind heart could be a dream keeper in their own quiet way. The telescope turned once more, its lens aimed now at the children, not to observe, but to bless. The tiny stone at its heart pulsed again, as if proud, and for the first time, Luma realized something. She was not the only one anymore. The world was waking up to its dreams, and it was beautiful. She led the children back to the hilltop, where the blossoms swayed and sparkled. The sun climbed gently into the sky, casting long shadows that curled like sleepy cats across the field. A hush of peace settled once more. The dreams would grow, and the dreamers would carry them. In the days that followed, the dream field on the hill became more than a secret place. It became a sanctuary, not just for Luma and the children, but for the quiet hopes of the world. From near and far, people began to arrive. They didn't come in crowds or caravans. They came gently, one by one, like snowflakes finding their way to earth. Some came with tired eyes and hearts heavy with forgotten wishes. Others came with laughter, holding stories in their pockets. All were welcomed. The field never grew crowded. Somehow, it always had room. The dream flowers shifted and swayed, making space with every step. The blossoms knew. They remembered every footfall, every dream, every whisper placed in the hands of night. Luma spent her mornings walking through the field, watering the roots of the dreams with dewdrops and soft songs. She wore a crown of ribbon and stardust, not made for beauty, but for remembering who she had become. The telescope stood tall at the hill's center, quiet but ever watchful, its tiny stone glowing like a heartbeat in sync with the land. One morning, while the grass was still wet with silver mist, a letter appeared beside the telescope. No one saw who left it. Luma picked it up gently. The paper was soft and folded neatly, sealed with a mark she recognized, the carving on the telescope's frame. She opened it slowly. "Dear Dreamkeeper, I once gazed through this very lens and wished to know the stars. I built this telescope not to see far, but to feel close, to the moon, to the silence, to the soft things no one speaks of. But I was alone. I thought I had to be. I was wrong. Thank you for finding what I left behind. Thank you for giving it more than I ever could. Thank you for becoming the light I hoped for. The dreams are safe now. Because of you. Yours always." The stargazer Luma pressed the letter to her heart. She didn't cry. She simply stood still and let the warmth of those words settle deep inside her like a seed. The telescope hummed. She placed the letter inside the drawer where she had first found the parchment that began her journey. The children gathered near, their faces glowing with morning light and quiet joy. Luma looked at them all and knew. It was time for the next story. Not hers, theirs. She gathered them close and knelt in the grass. The blossoms leaned in, as if listening. "Every dream you've carried, every dream you've shared," she whispered, "has left a trail in the stars." She held out her hand, and a single dream seed floated down into her palm. This one glowed brighter than the others, soft gold with flecks of blue and silver. It shimmered with something new. A beginning. She handed it to the smallest child, a boy with wide eyes and a shy smile. His fingers closed around it carefully. In an instant, the sky shimmered. A new star appeared. Not high, but low, hovering just above the field. It pulsed with warmth. Then another, and another. All around the field, stars descended. They floated gently like lanterns, surrounding the children in soft light. Each one was tied to a dream they had nurtured. Each one a promise they had helped protect. The children began to laugh. Soft, delighted laughter like wind chimes in spring. The stars didn't fall to the earth. They danced. Slowly at first, then in swirling spirals, rising and dipping through the air, casting ribbons of light across the sky. It was the first star dance, a celebration of dreams. Luma stood in the center, her hands at her heart, watching the joy unfold around her. The telescope glowed brighter than ever. The blossoms swayed in rhythm with the stars. And as the sun began to rise higher, the stars gently lifted one by one, returning to their places in the sky. But they left trails behind them, thin golden threads that connected the children's hearts to the constellations above. Luma saw it clearly. The threads were invisible to the eye, but not to the soul. Each dreamer was now tied to a star. Each heart held a piece of sky. The children sat in the grass, breathless with wonder. Luma spoke softly. "Every time you dream, your star glows brighter. Every time you listen, or care, or hope, you light the way for someone else." One child raised a hand. "Will the stars ever forget us?" Luma smiled gently. "No, because the stars don't just shine, they remember." She looked up. The sky was full of stories, and every single one had found its place. Time moved differently on the hill. It didn't rush or race. It drifted gently, like clouds across a sleepy sky. The dream flowers bloomed in slow, steady waves, always glowing, always growing. The telescope stood quietly at the center, no longer just a tool, but a symbol of listening, of wonder, of care. Luma had grown, though her face still held the soft light of childhood. Her voice had deepened into calm. Her laughter rang low and warm, like bells swinging over a cradle. She still rose with the dawn and walked barefoot through the blossoms, the little telescope hanging around her neck by a ribbon made of starlight and song. The children had grown too. Some stayed close, becoming gentle keepers of the field. Others wandered, following their own dream seeds to distant places, carrying soft stories in their hearts. But no matter where they went, the golden threads still tied them to the sky. They could feel it, on quiet nights or when the wind curled gently around their shoulders, that the stars still remembered their names. One evening, as twilight stretched its arms across the horizon, Luma stood beneath the archway once more. The grove of beginnings shimmered with quiet light. New dream seeds had gathered, soft and glowing, waiting for kind hands to carry them into the world. A small girl approached. Her eyes were the color of candlelight, and her hands trembled as she reached for a dream seed. Luma knelt beside her. "It's okay to be careful," she whispered. "Some dreams are shy." The girl looked up. "What if I drop it? Then we'll catch it together." The child smiled and the dream seed settled in her palm. It was tiny and gentle, but it glowed, and that was enough. That night, Luma sat beside the telescope once more. The sky above was brilliant with stars, some old, some new. Each one held a dream, a wish, a memory. The little stone inside the telescope pulsed softly. She placed her hand over it. "You've seen so much," she murmured, "but there's always more." And the telescope turned, not to the stars, but to the earth, to the hills and rivers and quiet corners of the world, to forgotten attics where children built castles from old books, to city rooftops where tired eyes searched the sky for something soft, to rain-washed windows where someone whispered a hope they hadn't spoken aloud. The telescope saw it all, and Luma understood. The dreams didn't just live in stars or dream fields. They lived in people, in laughter, in kindness, in quiet courage. She looked up at the sky, then down at the children curled among the blossoms, some sleeping, some drawing stars in the dirt with glowing sticks. And she made a choice. That night, for the first time in many moons, Luma wrote a letter. She tucked it gently into the drawer beneath the telescope. She kissed it once, then whispered a lullaby. And in the morning, when the dew still clung to the petals and the birds had only just begun to sing, the letter was gone, but in its place was a trail, a shimmering path of petals and stars winding down from the hill into the world. It glowed softly, invitingly, like a dream ready to be followed. Luma looked around one last time. She had cared for the dreams. She had watched them grow. And now, it was time to carry her own into the world. With her tiny telescope nestled close to her heart and the threads of 1,000 stars trailing behind her, she stepped onto the path. The dream flowers swayed goodbye. The children waved with sleepy smiles. The telescope gave one final hum of joy, and Luma walked forward, not away but onward, to new gardens, new songs, new dreamers. Because some stories don't end, they bloom, forever and always beneath the watchful sky.